My name is Elena Pnevmonidou. I teach in the Department of Germanic and Slavic Studies at the University of Victoria. And I am the initiator of the cluster on German Orientalisms. The full name of the cluster is East meets West German Orientalisms. And the plural at the end is quite deliberate because the purpose of this cluster is to challenge any notion that there is a coherent, homogeneous, monolithic concept of a German attitude towards the East, the Orient, whatever that concept might even mean. What motivated me to put together this research cluster is because we have reached a very interesting point, in the conception of Orientalism in general, so in post-colonial theory and more broadly in scholarship on Orientalism, but also we have reached an interesting point in German studies itself. So there's two interesting trends that occur in different areas that are related, that make it interesting and necessary for a specific project on re-exploring, re-examining the German variant of Orientalism. So let's speak first about the broad dimension. What are the changes that are occurring in understandings about Orientalism? So in post-colonial theory, the first investigation of this concept was, of course, triggered by Edward Said in the late 1970s with his monumental work, Orientalism. And that framework that Said established creates a very binary approach of East and West, and it is an approach that also is very much focused on how the West constructs a discourse about the East. So in Said and in various facets of the first couple of phases of post-colonial theory, Orientalism is really about us, the Westerners, thinking about the Orient. It isn't much about the Orient itself, speaking itself. So we've reached, however, a very different point in Orientalist studies post-Said, where more and more the question is not about how are we thinking about the Orient, but what hybrid new voices are emerging in the mixture of the two spaces, actually. So it's not us talking about the East, and it's also not the East talking about itself. It's that hybrid space where the two intersect, actually. So that's where we're at right now, in theoretically speaking. In terms of German studies, where we're at, in the past, Orientalism in the German context was a fantasy. Germany did not, unlike England or France or other countries, Germany did not have any actual colonial stakes in the Orient. So the Orient is a space of the imagination and fantasy. That is the case in the 18th and 19th century. However, when we move to the late 20th and 21st century, we have a very different political and social landscape in Germany that fundamentally changes the way we conceptualize the East, the Orient, the Middle East, Muslims, etc. And I mean, of course, not just Germany, but German-speaking countries. In Germany, now, specifically, we have several generations of Turkish people living in Germany, fundamentally changing the public landscape, contributing significantly to public discourses, to culture, right? Post 9/11, of course, there is a completely different discourse, much more volatile discourse about Muslims in Europe in general and in German-speaking countries specifically. So Germany, German-speaking countries are interesting against the theoretical backdrop that I established because you cannot say that it is still this binary space of the 19th century where the West has an imaginative fantasy about the East. The East is in the West. We have such a pluralistic conception of society emerging in German-speaking countries, where the so-called Orientals, Muslims, in other words, Turks and other Muslims, are making are a significant part of German culture and society. So what is the purpose then of our cluster? Our cluster is to think about Orientalism as a dynamic interaction rather than a binary discourse. It's not anymore about us talking about something out there that is foreign and alien. What this cluster is mostly interested in investigating is this dynamic interaction of cultures. We can call it a third space, perhaps, in between the East and the West. And we want to look at new hybrid expressions, discursive and political and cultural expressions that emerge in this very more new, very dynamic and much more heterogeneous landscape that we currently have philosophically, but also socially in German-speaking countries.